How to manage your company through a crisis. That is the topic of conversation today with my guest, Mark Brooks, the co-president and COO at Permanent Equity. Mark is a second-time guest on Construction Genius, so you know that if I bring him back, it's because they're totally awesome. All right. Permanent Equity invests with no intention of selling in family-held companies headquartered in North America. And they have 12 portfolio companies and a current capital base in excess of $300 million. So Mark gets a bird's eye view into companies as they go through the different ups and downs of their existence. And he has a particular interest in helping companies when they do hit crisis. And so we talk about the importance of a CEO looking into their metrics and budgets, the importance of over-communicating appropriately to people the nature of the crisis that you're going through, how to collaborate with your management team to overcome crisis in your company, how to make cuts, and which cuts to make and which cuts not to make in your business. And then also how to manage your own health and peace of mind as you're going through a crisis. I know you're going to get tons of value from this conversation. Make sure that you are paying close attention. And if you are a CEO or a president, this is the podcast episode for you. So feel free to share it with others as well. And of course, please give the show a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. Enjoy my conversation with Mark. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Mark, welcome back to Construction Genius.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Really glad to be here.
I know I was just telling you, but I want to tell the readers, our last conversation about incentivizing performance made it into my book, Construction Genius, as one of the chapters. And so I want to thank you for coming back on the show, and I'm hoping to have a similar impactful conversation here today.
Good. Well, I hope I can make the cut on the second book.
Okay, so today's topic is about managing in crisis. And I want to just begin right out of the gate by asking you, what are the biggest mistakes CEOs make when a crisis hits their business?
Yeah, so I'll talk about two. One is panic, and the other is hero syndrome. So I think that one of the first problems that we can create for ourselves is panicking when crisis comes up. And I think owners of businesses, founders of businesses, CEOs of businesses tend to have a bias for action. That's why they are where they are. And sometimes we find that our greatest strengths are also our greatest weaknesses. So when we get into a time of crisis, we can be bent towards just doing things, right? Like we go into like fight or flight mode and we just start reacting. We start calling people, we start doing things, we start making discounts for our customers or cutting people. And we don't really give ourselves time to sit down and think through what the situation actually means for our business and how we should be reacting. So I think panic is the first one. And sometimes it doesn't even feel like panic. Again, just feels like I'm taking action. I'm doing what I need to do as the CEO, which leads to the second problem, which is hero syndrome, which can look like a couple of different things. The first is, I need to get us out of this. I'm going to take all of the responsibility on my shoulders. I don't want anyone else to freak out about this, so I'm going to hold all the information close to the vest so that I can solve this and no one else freaks out. And that can lead not only to burnout, but frequently when it's an actual crisis, we don't have the bandwidth to handle everything that needs to be handled. So we're not asking for help. We're not confiding in friends and family that we're going through a stressful time. So we tend to get unhealthy. So I'd say those are the two biggest mistakes, is panic, and highly related to that, kind of the hero syndrome or the hero complex of I'm going to be the one to get us out of this.
Okay, so let's talk about panic to begin with. Well, first, how can I recognize that and then begin to work through that emotional response to get to something a little more rational and more helpful when the crisis hits?
Yeah, I'd combine a couple of different concepts. One is I hope that you've got a group of folks inside your company, either your leadership team or loosely affiliated group of folks who you can confide in with what the business is going through. So you need being able to share that with a group of folks inside the business who understand the levers that you have available to pull is a critical first step, because I'm guessing the reason that you have them on your team to begin with is because they've got good ideas. They've shown themselves to be capable operators, capable of handling their area. They're going to think of things that you're not in terms of responding to the crisis. And we will tend as people to gravitate as an individual contributor towards the things that we know best. So if you came up through the organization or came up through your career on the sales side, a lot of your solutions to crisis are going to be related to sales. If you came up through finance, a lot of your solutions are going to be towards finance. If you came up through operations, you're going to have operational solutions. So really getting a cross-functional team together with whom you can be pretty honest about what the company is facing is a key first step. The second one that I would suggest is trying to get all the cards on the table together with that team. So I've talked about this being determining a confidence interval. So it's not necessarily a budgeting exercise. That's kind of a big, scary word for a lot of folks because we can take weeks and months to do, but really kind of back of the envelope, thinking through all the key financial levers of your business. And with that group of trusted individuals inside the company saying, okay, given this crisis, what do we think is the best case scenario coming out of this crisis? And what do we think is the worst case scenario coming out of this crisis? And then thinking through as the crisis unfolds and you get more and more data, if we start heading towards the low end of this scenario, what are the key decisions that we need to make to dig ourselves out of it? If we start heading towards the high side of this scenario, what are the opportunities that we can capitalize on that maybe our competitors can't? So I would say first step, get all the right folks in the room, some cross-functional expertise, thinking about the different areas of the business. And the second is for each of those people, okay, we think this is the range of potential outcomes given this crisis. As it unfolds, what decisions do we need to be making if we head towards the high side or to the low side so that kind of your menu of options is known at the beginning and you're not scrambling each time a new data point comes in to figure out what to do next.
Okay, that's excellent. So let me just back up a little bit and ask this question. When you say crisis, what do you mean by that? What are some of the sources of crisis or crises or whatever the case is that hits a business?
Sure. So I would say it can be specific or secular decline in the top line of the business. So to talk about that, if you've built your business on the back of a really great government contract that suddenly goes poof, or you're a sub and you've got a really great GC that you've worked with for a number of years and there's management turnover and you get dropped. There's like a concentration risk in the revenue stream of the business that goes away and you're left with a big hole in revenue. The second would be a secular decline. So kind of what we're seeing in a lot of parts of the construction market now, there's a general slowdown in spending on construction. So that's another potential risk is like not just one particular or two particular customers going away, but all of your customers deciding to spend less in general. That's kind of on the top line side. And then through the entire stack of the business, this can look like a major lawsuit. It can look like the mismanagement that you're responsible for of a very large project that's going to lead to massive cost overruns and cost you a bunch of money. It can look like a key employee leaving at a really bad time or leaving for a competitor or leaving to start their own thing that's going to compete directly with you. There's any number of these things I would refer to as crisis. And those are kind of the things that we're thinking of as we go through this exercise.
Okay, so I'm putting myself in the shoes of someone who's running a company. My first instinct, and this is just a lot to do with my own way of behaving, is to hold things really close to me and to not talk about it. And you mentioned that a little bit in terms of the hero syndrome.
Yeah.
I want to ask, how soon do I start socializing a crisis so I'm not sort of chicken littling it? And then who do I start communicating with it about it first? I mean, it's kind of like if you have a crisis in your family, do I just talk to my wife about it, or am I going to bring the kids in? My 5-year-old's looking at me saying, Daddy, why are you stressing out?
Yeah.
Who am I bringing into these conversations? And what is the timing of that socialization of the issue?
Yep. So I think the first thing that you want to make sure of is that the crisis is real. And it depends on your personality as a person also. So like I tend to be a more extroverted person, which means my processing happens externally. I want to talk to other people to process ideas. If you're more introverted, you're probably naturally predisposed to give something a little bit more time to unfold as you're thinking about it, rather than wanting to go out and talk to people about it immediately. So a lot of it's going to depend on your personality posture as a person. But I would say that the thing that's common across all of those is make sure that this is an actual crisis. So if it's a key employee leaving at a bad time or going to a competitor and they come to you and say, I'm thinking about leaving, let's make sure that they're actually serious about that before we go get the entire leadership team spun up about trying to replace them. Or a customer comes back and says, I want to negotiate pricing on contracts going forward. Okay, let's get into the meat of that discussion and not jump to conclusions that they're looking to leave us completely. So I would say that's the first, is make sure that the crisis is real. My recommendation would be, as soon as you know that it is a crisis, start communicating it with some group of people, which gets to the second part of your question, which is the first people that you want to involve are the ones whose area of expertise touches the crisis. So if this is a revenue crisis, then you want to be talking to your head of sales or your head of business development to talk about how you're going to go after backfilling that gap in your revenue number. If it's a legal issue, clearly you want to be bringing in your inside counsel or your outside counsel, whoever your consigliere is, right? You want to be involving them in that kind of conversation. So it should be subject matter specific at the beginning. And really, those initial conversations should be defining what the crisis is and what the potential impact could be. Because as a general manager type or a CEO type, they're going to have the expertise that is going to better extrapolate what this crisis actually means for the business, maybe than you would be. So that initial conversation is, hey, I think this is serious. Do you agree that this is serious? And if that's a trusted individual who's got expertise in their area, then their answer should help dictate then who else you bring in on this, right? So if your head of sales says, yeah, that's a really big problem, we need to involve other people in it, then maybe you bring in a couple of your key salespeople to discuss that. You're bringing in your CFO or your director of accounting to let them know that you're going to start seeing this flow through the books, that sort of thing. So it kind of creeps out, starting at the person who's the closest to the issue, helping you define that the issue, this is actually a crisis. This is what I think the impact is going to be. And then as those other impacted folks get involved, you kind of develop a more well-rounded understanding of the problem and how you're going to get after it.
History is replete with examples of people who fail in crisis, either because of inaction or wrong action. Let's look at the inaction side of it. In your experience, what are some of the biggest acts of inactivity that a CEO commits that causes them to struggle more in a crisis?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think a lot of it has to do with what you're measuring and how you measure it. So you may be used to, in times of plenty, a certain cadence on updating your cost to complete, a certain cadence on talking to your supervisor as to going out and visiting jobs, a certain amount of double checking on quotes before they go out the door. And a lot of that stuff you need to double and triple down on in a time of crisis, right? So your cost to complete from your PMs, that we're doing those, instead of doing them once a month, we're doing them every 2 weeks, or we're doing them every week, because we need to be counting every dollar as it comes in and making sure if there is scope creep on those or cost creep on those jobs that we're nipping it very closely.
So if I'm doing that, then if I change the cadence of my checking in, how does that then balance with not wanting to create unnecessary tension in the organization? Or have I at this point already communicated, guys, we're in a crisis here and this is how we're handling it?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think at this point you will have wanted to communicate it.
Okay.
Because there's this interesting part of human nature where if we don't have an explanation of something that's going on, we seek one. And usually that's the rumor mill is what fills in those gaps. And it's not necessarily negative, and it's not people trying to be destructive. It's just that the human brain wants we crave explanation for things. And so when we as leaders create a vacuum and we say, I need you to do this, which is really weird and different from what you're usually doing, and not explain to you why you're doing it, you're going to go out and talk to the woman sitting next to you and the guy sitting to your left and saying, why are we doing this? What do you think is going on? And that's how the rumor mill starts to fill in those gaps. Again, it's not negative. Like, people aren't doing it to be subversive. They just crave explanation, which is why you've got to be on top of your communication with your team. So we talk about like updating reports more often. Also, you need to be increasing your cadence of communication with your team. So if you're used to doing like a quarterly all hands meeting with your team or a once a month meeting with your supervisors, you need to be doing that more often also, because as the information changes, remember, you're modulating your decisions based on whether you're headed towards a high side or towards a low side or towards kind of a middle of the road type of thing. So in increasing that cadence of communication, because you will, as you pointed out, you are going to light a few fires by communicating that the company is going through a difficult time. But the way that you keep those fires productive, like, hey, I need the absolute best you have to offer from me, like that's a good fire. How you keep it from being a distracting inferno is by continually communicating with people, hey, this is what I know now, and this is what I know now, and this is what I know now. And if they feel like they're plugged into the same information pipeline that their leadership is, then that's going to keep it from being less of an inferno and more of a productive fire that's creating urgency, good, healthy urgency on the team.
I hope you're enjoying my conversation here today with Mark. Just a quick break to remind you of my book, Construction Genius: Effective, Hands-On, Practical, Simple, No BS Leadership, Strategy, Sales, and Marketing Advice for Construction Companies. One of the things that great companies do during times of crisis is they don't give up on training and developing their people. The nice thing about this book is it only costs $20 on Amazon. So what you can do is you can purchase a copy for you and everyone on your leadership team, and you can commit to reading 1 or 2 chapters a month for the next 6 months. There's 12 chapters in the book, and discuss together for maybe an hour every month the learnings that you get from the book. This can be a tremendous way to keep communication lines open during a time of crisis, to encourage one another, and to pick up practical, simple strategies to improve your leadership. So don't stop developing your people. Take a beneficial and economical route to developing your people by purchasing this book. I know you're going to enjoy it. It's totally awesome. And now, back to our conversation with Mark. Okay, so I want to ask this in terms of CEO communication. I think about like in World War II, right? When Churchill became the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, they were in a really tough spot, and he became famous for these really rousing speeches, tons of charisma and bulldog determination and all of that. Let's say that I'm just an engineer, right? I started my construction company and I'm not really a charismatic guy or gal. How do I rally my troops in these situations when perhaps I come at a crisis with a very sort of even-tempered demeanor, or I don't really have a ton of charisma? Is that really necessary in these situations?
I think it's less necessary than we might assume. I think people really value a level head in crisis. I think when someone can describe the situation in a very even-keeled manner, saying, hey, we lost our key customer, and this is what it means for us in terms of a percentage of our revenue, but I have faith in you, sales team. I have faith in you, business development, to help us go fill that gap. I think there's a certain level-headedness that I think people will appreciate. The rousing speeches can very easily be replaced by a level-headed plan for how you're going to get after things. I think that's what people want to know, is that you're thinking with a clear head and a clear mind, and you and your leadership team have ideas to get after the problem and to quell the crisis. So I don't think we all need to be Churchills, but I think we do need to have been thoughtful about, okay, what does this crisis mean and how are we going to address it? People like to know that you're working towards a solution.
So then there's also this phrase that many of us are familiar with: never let a crisis go to waste, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so sometimes when I'm talking to construction companies, they've been working so hard for the last few years. We're recording this in 2023. And because of the volume of work, they've had to bring on people who, frankly, are B- or C players. And so that leads to the whole issue of cuts when it comes to how you should address a crisis. So when is the right time to begin to make cuts either in your overhead, your indirect overhead, or the direct overhead, such as people themselves?
Right. Yeah. So the right answer on this, which is not very helpful and is going to sound very preachy, is you shouldn't have those B- and C players in the first place. It happens to everybody. It happens to the best managers out there. So in terms of thinking through cuts, I think you need to think through basically three different levels of cuts. So the way that we like to think about those is fat, muscle, and bone. So that's how we kind of categorize them. So if you're cutting fat, these are types of positions that are nice to haves, that are kind of, I'll call them quote unquote luxury positions. The extreme example is like if you've got a massage therapist on staff, that's probably more like a, or a nutritionist or something like that. That's not a critical role to keeping the company afloat. So that's kind of a fat type of a role. The second is muscle, which we would define as things that when they get cut, can grow back. They can grow back, right? So we do a hard workout, we destroy muscle, and it can come back from that, and sometimes even stronger, right? So we're thinking about muscle. So that's, hey, we need to really trim down OpEx. So we're going to cut our project management team by 25%. Is that a painful cut? Yeah, absolutely. Is it going to make the other PMs work much harder than they were before? Yes. But is it a function that you can go out and hire again? Yes, you can. So there's those muscle types of cuts also. And then cutting bone that's a structural cut where you recognize that if it can be built back, it's going to take years to do it. So this is carving off in maybe for sale or for liquidation entire divisions of the company or locations that you would have to completely build back. Like those are bone types of cuts where they are deeply painful in the short term. And if they are going to be built back, it's extremely expensive, both from a money or time perspective. And so you want to be very selective about what those cuts are. If I can expand on the cuts idea just for a minute, there's this concept in oncology with oncological surgeons called margin. So if you've ever had like a tell from how pale I am, I've had to have skin surgery before for skin cancer. So
white boy.
Yeah, exactly. So what they talk about is removing margin around that spot, right? So they're knowingly removing a little bit of healthy tissue around what they know to be unhealthy in order to make sure that they don't have to go do it again. So this is another thing that I recommend is if it comes to the point where you know you have to make cuts, there's very little that is more demoralizing to a team than a cut followed by another cut, followed by another cut, followed by another cut. You will see the productivity of your team absolutely fall off a cliff because all the time that they were spending being productive, they're now spending gossiping with each other about when the next shoe is going to drop. And they're going to be interviewing for jobs and that sort of thing. So if at all possible, if you do need to cut, do a slightly larger cut than feels necessary at the time to give yourself some margin in case things get worse and you don't have to go back and do cut after cut after. The 1,000 paper cuts method of doing this is absolutely miserable.
It's interesting. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about the luxuries real quick. Give me some practical examples of what you think are luxuries and what are perceived as luxuries, but they're actually not, and they need to be kept even in crisis.
That's a really good question. I think this is a slightly different answer, and then I'll come back to your original question. I think sometimes we tend to focus on things that feel like luxuries, but are going to have like zero impact on the bottom line. So it's like, hey, I've got that basket of granola bars at the front door. I'm going to take that away. That's a luxury. And it's like a $150 item across the year. Like it's the wrong thing to focus on. I think focusing your time based on not on the percentages that you can cut or the things that feel like luxury items, but what they actually cost the business to maintain. And there are even small things like that that are still there in a time of crisis can actually be fairly meaningful to employees. Sometimes it's the small stuff that's the most meaningful. So I'm thinking about things that you've maybe outsourced because you didn't want to have to worry about them internally anymore. And you can bring them in-house and ask somebody to do a little bit more work given with your current OpEx budget. And you can cut that third-party supplier for that service or whatever. That would be an example of a fat sort of a thing because you can always go out and hire that third party again. You're not burning any bridges there. They'll love to have your business back. So that's an example. I think the key thing to remember is We want to be focused on the stuff that's actually impactful, not just the stuff that we know on the surface is a nice to have, like the basket of granola bars, but stuff that's actually going to have a meaningful impact on your budget going forward. And then there was a second part to your question that I don't remember. Oh, is the flip side. So what feels like fat that's not actually fat?
Yeah. Well, I think you made a good example there with the granola bars, right? Because I'm walking in and maybe I'm mad that day and I see the granola bars and I'm like, get these out of here. We're not doing granola bars anymore. And I'm like, dude, come on. It's like you said, it's $150. If you can't afford $150, you really are in crisis.
Right. Right. Well, and I would say, let's think about this from a construction angle specifically, like truck allowances, right? So those might feel like fat to you, but those are actually, we find, very important pieces of compensation especially for field folks. And it has really like extreme personal financial consequences for those folks to lose their truck allowance. And it makes them think very differently about their commute to job sites and that sort of thing. So I think that's a good example of, man, I'm giving this guy $600 a month for a truck allowance. That's fat. I'd be pretty careful about that, especially if you're using them for high-performing employees. It's probably less fatty than you think and more muscular.
So it's interesting because we're recording this in February 2023. People have been trying to talk us into a recession for the last 18 months. They haven't quite succeeded yet, but they're still working hard at it.
Yes.
With that in mind, coming out of the pandemic and all that kind of stuff, we've got a bunch of hybrid work or work from home situations. Do you view that as an example of the fat that perhaps is going to get trimmed in a time of crisis where I'm going to start to bring my people back in because I need to manage them more carefully?
Yeah, I think it could certainly be a casualty for sure. My personal leaning on this is I think face-to-face is really important. We talk a lot about the trust bank. So when you're face-to-face with someone, the highest trust transfer, the highest bandwidth of trust transfer you can have is having a meal with someone, right? And then slightly down from that is taking a walk with someone or taking a hike or something like that. Doing something physically outdoors with somebody is the next. Then you get, down to Zoom and like phone calls and text messages, and the trust transfer on those is very, very low, to the point where we like to think if you're interacting with someone that way on a normal basis, all you're doing is taking withdrawals from the trust bank that you created with those higher bandwidth interactions. I think a lot of what we've been doing with the move to remote since the pandemic is imperceptibly but steadily taking withdrawals from the trust bank. And I think your relationships, especially with high-performing employees, count so much on an extremely high level of trust when you're delegating out real meaningful decision-making, that if you continue to let that atrophy and you're not bringing people in and meeting face-to-face and sharing meals together and taking walks, that sort of a thing, you're going to find yourself in a critical situation, maybe even a crisis like this, where the trust bank is so low that you find it difficult to delegate those critical decisions when you need to get stuff off your plate so you can focus on another area. So yeah, I think that remote could be a casualty. And I think there is, and I'm going to sound like an old guy here, but I think there is a tremendous amount of value to being face to face with people so that you can build up that trust level with them just for times like this.
Excellent. I appreciate that insight there. So let's just run through a scenario here. I have two project managers. One project manager has been with me, let's say, for a period of time. They're in their 50s. Their salary is, let's say, $150,000 a year. And with bonuses, maybe they get up to 200 or something like that. I have another project manager. They're in their, let's say, early 30s. Their salary is more around, let's say, the $90,000 level. With bonuses, maybe they creep up to the 150, something like that. How do I go? And I have to ask one of them.
Gosh.
I know. I have to choose between one of the two.
Yeah.
How do I go through, other than looking at the number, how do I go through that process of deciding which one I have to let go?
I would like to think that you have some way of measuring the productivity of those two employees. And I think a lot of it is going to depend on the type of crisis that you're going through and which of those it impacts the most. Like if one of them is in a different location where the economy is robust and the other one is not, there are going to be some extenuating circumstances. The question is a little bit fraught with peril because one of those people is a protected class and the other is not. So you have to be extremely careful from a legal perspective about how you're making that decision. But I will say it shouldn't drive the decision. If we think a lot about the difference between performance and potential, so what is somebody's ceiling versus where they are right now, right? So if you believe that people perform on a curve, right, and how steep is the curve for person one versus person two, and where do they exist on it right now? And given the nature of the crisis, whose skill set do you need more? Like if this is a crisis that is going to define whether or not the business survives or not, you may need to go with the veteran employee who has been through a downturn before and knows how to operate, even though his or her ceiling is substantially lower than the ceiling of the younger person. So I hate to give you an it depends type of a question or type of an answer, but there are a number of different factors. And depending on how severe the crisis is, you need to be optimizing for survival of the business. If it's not a survival question, then I'm probably going to opt for the person who has the higher ceiling, because again, that's more of a fat versus muscle type of a decision. Can I rebuild that muscle? Yes, I can. So I'm going to go with someone who's got the potentially higher ceiling, might be a leader in the organization for a long time. But again, depends heavily on what skill sets you need to navigate the crisis right now.
As you were speaking, I was thinking about how one individual might be a combination of muscle and bone. You know, you have like this older person who's got a relationship, let's say, with a key client.
Yeah.
And I just can't let them go, because if I let them go, then that's a bone decision. Whereas if I let the younger PM go, that might be more of a muscle decision. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even great managers will run into decisions like that where they've like somebody owns a key relationship, but you have to hang on to them even though they're a jerk. And it's a terrible situation to be in. But I mean, if you're listening to this and you're going through a time of plenty right now and your business is robust and you're doing great, it's good to think through what the next crisis might look like, not in a paranoid sort of a way, but what are the decisions that I can make now when I have an abundance of resources that would make a dip easier on my business? So I'm not having to make these decisions in a time of crisis. I can make them when things are better. I need to implement better visibility on how productive my PMs are versus each other. So I've got a better understanding of what my stable of talent looks like. Making those kinds of decisions when things are going well can make navigating crisis easier once you get there.
Okay, so we've got to go with the Godfather reference now. And I can't remember the exact characters. But, you know, in The Godfather, you had a consigliere to the Godfather.
Yep.
And the war broke out. And Michael says to this guy, what was his name? Oh, it's coming to my mind. It was the bald dude. But anyway, the point is this. There's a peacetime consigliere and there's a wartime consigliere.
Oh, was it Robert Duvall?
Yeah, Robert Duvall. Okay, yeah. I'm trying to remember what his name was in the... Anyway, the point being, Michael comes to him, right? And Michael says, you're a peacetime consigliere, and now it's wartime, and I need to move you aside. Okay, so let's say I hit that crisis, and I have maybe my COO or my business development person, and they're very much a peacetime type person. I don't want to cap them, so to speak. I don't want to move them out of the business completely, but I need to move them to the side and maybe reassign them for the period of time. How do I handle that conversation? Is that a realistic scenario there at all?
Yeah, I think it's very realistic and something that you might run into. Again, this is where I feel like being completely honest and transparent with people actually buys you a lot. And being able to tell them, hey, look, we're going to go through a difficult time here. And I see qualities in person B that I need to elevate right now. And these are the things that I appreciate about you, bada bing, bada bang, bada boom. But for the time being, I need to have this person come alongside you to help fight this war with me. So I think this is why cultivating healthy, open communication with folks during times of plenty is important, so that when we get to these difficult moments, we're not trying to suddenly establish a trusting relationship with them so that we can have difficult conversations, and being able to tell them, I really need a complementary set of skills to yours, and I'm going to bring them up alongside you until this crisis abates. And I really need you to work together with them and teach them the things that you know. Keep them involved. Don't sideline them completely. If you have specific projects or pieces of work that you can hand to them at the same time, like this is what I need you to focus on during this time, I think that's going to help them feel valued long-term also.
It's interesting because when it comes to cutting, a lot of the typical mindset is sort of last in, first out. So if you were hired 6 months ago, then you're probably going to be shown the door right away. But it sounds like from what you're saying, Mark, that that's not always the best approach to take.
Yeah, I agree. It's not. I think we've all had the experience of hiring someone who is a total crackerjack. Like the second she walks in the door, she gets the business. She understands how to prioritize. She understands how to get projects done inside of the framework that you're working in. So I think it's difficult to let people go. It's one of the worst parts of management. Extremely difficult to let people go with whom you've had a relationship for a long time. It is even more difficult than that to do that knowing you've got less experienced employees that you're keeping instead. But I think the challenging thing when we think about cuts is this framework of I'm cutting a few so I don't have to cut all. If I'm having to cut a few at the beginning, I need to do that in such a way with the mind of saving as many jobs as I possibly can. If the less experienced, lower tenured employee gets you there more effectively than the folks that have been around for a while, then a lot of times that's a trade-off we have to make. We've got to make the trade-off based on who is going to be the best bridge to the next version of the company. There's a lot of kind of what got you here can't get you there type of thinking in that, which can be really painful. Like, I mean, these are the people that we know about their families. We've been to holiday parties together, all those sorts of things. Like these are, I don't mean to make light of these decisions. They're gut wrenching and terrible. And like I said, the worst part of management. But your decisions now in a crisis are going to impact your future decisions exponentially. So making sure that you've got the right people on the bus is critically important.
So you use the phrase there, gut wrenching, which is definitely something that a lot of leaders go through. And there's a physical, psychological, emotional toll that comes when a crisis hits. And of course, they feel this tremendous burden of putting on a good face to the company, not necessarily fake, but we are going to have blood, sweat, and tears, but we are going to win, so to speak. What advice do you have in terms of getting outside help or in somehow being able to marshal outside resources to help through a process for someone who's in leadership?
Yeah, I think it's challenging because if you're a founder of a business, especially, or if you're a CEO of a business that was founded before you, we let so much of our identity get tied up in our work and in this thing that we have built and we are building, that when we suffer, when we run into challenges, it's difficult for us to be honest with other people about that because we're taking ourselves down a peg because we've anchored so much of our identity to that. So again, like if you're in a time of plenty now, start thinking about unwinding your identity from what you do for a living. It's an important part of what you do, but kind of making that who you are can be extremely painful when things go sideways. But I think it's critically important to have people in your life who are outside of the business in whom you can confide about what you're going through, a significant other or a friend, dear friend, or someone you play tennis with or something like that. Like having those people in your life with whom you can be honest about what you're going through is critically important. This goes back to the very beginning of our conversation, right, Eric, with the hero complex. You can run into the hero complex not just inside the business, but outside of the business. You're storing all this stress in your body and it's going to kill you. Maybe not literally, but I mean, emotionally and spiritually, like it's going to eat you alive. So having people that you can confide in about going through a difficult time is really, really key.
That's essential there. So last question here as we're summing this up. So let's say I started my business in 2010. So I've been in business now for over 10 years and I've built a really successful business. But you know what? I've never really hit a macroeconomic crisis like, let's say, '08. And I felt pretty good about myself. But maybe it's because the rising tide has been rising all of the boats and I'm not quite as good as I think I am. What advice do you have for the CEO who's going through his or her first major crisis?
Yeah, I think, again, it comes down to being willing to confide in and listen to those people around you. And I'm not just talking about the folks outside of the business. I'm talking about the ones inside as well. And getting their help analyzing how critical this crisis is and how much risk there is on the business as a result. In addition to bottling things up, and the hero complex, sometimes we just get extremely insular. Like we're going through a lot of pain as a result of this crisis. We don't want to expose ourselves to more pain by having someone say, yeah, you need to hey, CEO, hey, founder, you need to do this differently, right? That's even more painful to know that decisions that we made or are making might be a factor in this crisis. But really, you have to orient yourself towards the future of the business, not on the past. Right? We need to be thinking about how do we make this thing that we've had the pleasure of creating survive to the next greatest version of itself. And in order to do that, we have to be open hands about the decisions that we're making and their validity in the past versus the way that we need to operate now to navigate the crisis. So to answer your question, I think, again, it comes down to being open and honest with the people around you and being willing to let them be open and honest with you about the things that you might need to change in order to navigate the crisis successfully.
That's tremendous. So, Mark, tell us a little bit more about permanent equity and the work that you do with businesses.
Yeah, so permanent equity is kind of a unique. We are technically a private equity firm, but we're very different from traditional private equity. We tend to partner with businesses who are interested in not getting flipped. So we operate 30-year funds. We buy businesses without the intention of selling them, and we typically do that with little to no debt. So we're fairly hands-off operators. We like to partner with the current management teams who are already in place and kind of act as confidants and consultants as they run the business. So if you've got a business that has been successful and you don't have a great plan to transfer the business over, we would love to talk to you.
Excellent. And specifically, because folks who are listening to this are construction companies, what type, size construction company would you guys say, hey, this is kind of in my wheelhouse?
Yeah, so we typically look at businesses that have earnings between $2.5 million and $25 million. It's a pretty big range, but that kind of gives you the idea of the size that we're looking at. And in terms of the top line of the business, we have a very wide range on that. But that's kind of the earnings band that we tend to look for when we're looking for these, again, typically family-owned legacy businesses that are looking to transfer for another generation.
Excellent. And how can people get in touch with you, Mark?
I am Mark at permanentequity.com. Hopefully that's easy enough to remember.
Yeah, I know. Hey, and that's Mark with a K.
That's Mark with a K. That's right. Thank you. Good clarification.
Awesome. And we'll have links in the show notes to the Permanent Equity website so that you can get in touch and learn more about the company. Mark, thank you so much for coming on again. I appreciate you diving into this idea of how to manage through a crisis. I know folks are really going to be able to take some practical takeaways and use that to help them through the ups and downs of their business. Really appreciate you joining us on Construction Genius today.
Yeah, happy to do it. Thanks for having me back, Eric.
All right. Thank you for listening to today's episode with Mark Brooks. I hope you enjoyed our discussion on how to navigate through crisis in your business. Feel free to check out Permanent Equity at permanentequity.com and learn more about what they do. And if you are the CEO or president of your construction company and you are currently going through a crisis and you're looking for some outside support in terms of a sounding board to help you navigate through the stormy waters that you're in, please reach out to me on my website, constructiongenius.com. In my executive coaching practice, I work with the CEOs and presidents of construction companies, helping them to overcome the obstacles and challenges that they face on a daily basis. And I'd be happy to have a short chat with you about if or how I can help you and your company. So again, reach out at constructiongenius.com. You'll see the contact tab, fill in your details, and I will get back to you within 24 hours. Thanks again for listening to Construction Genius, and we'll catch you on the next episode.